The word propaganda is thrown around a lot in America and probably most of the rest of the world too. But do you know how much of what you consume is just that? Propaganda? You might be surprised by the answer. I know I was. But the truth is that everything you consume is some kind of propaganda or another. Yes, even this video, which I decided to call Propaganda About Propaganda, is, you guessed it, propaganda. So why should you even stick around now that I told you the dirty truth about this and most content in the world? Well, I hope you will, because this particular piece of propaganda was made with an altruistic intent to help you better recognize the propaganda you're being force-fed so that you can at least try to make some choices for yourself. So in this video, I will talk about first what propaganda is and a little about its history. Then I will talk about the rise of the medium and finally get to the part most important to you, how to recognize and not be fooled by all the propaganda in the world. Before I go on, I want to clarify that as someone born in 1980, I consider myself part of the Xennial generation. Through this channel, I aim to explore the world from our unique perspective. My videos showcase my philosophical understanding of the subject, supplemented with verifiable facts and information to support my beliefs. If you disagree, I welcome your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. As always, there are chapters in the description that will let you skip to any section you want. If you're new here at the Xennial Philosopher, thanks for checking out my creation. I hope you'll return soon to continue expanding your perception and growing your mind alongside me. Now, let's first learn about what propaganda really is. What's propaganda? Of course, we need to define the word first, and like all words, it isn't that simple. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary's website, propaganda has 3 definitions, and the first one is odd, but somewhat relevant, so we'll start there. When propaganda is capitalized, it refers to a congregation of the Roman Curia having jurisdiction over missionary territories and related institutions. Before that, the word meant propagate in Latin, which uses the base word propagare, which means to reproduce or grow. The term was used in various Latin-based languages to refer to the propagation of biological life. The first use of the word propaganda in English is traced to 1718, when the Catholic Church adopted the word to induce the propagation, not of life forms, but of the Christian faith. They called it de propaganda fide. Propaganda, as an English word, held on to this religious connotation for about 100 years. Then the French Revolution broke out, and the word took on an entirely new and much more political meaning. This brings us to the other 2 definitions in the dictionary, which are much more relevant to our discussion. Definition number 2 says, propaganda is the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, a cause, or a person. Now that's more like it. Definition 3 lines up perfectly with this. Ideas, facts, or allegations spread deliberately to further one's cause or damage an opposing cause. Now we have the official definitions in place and are all on the same page. Propaganda is often used for political and other activities, but when did this practice come into fashion, and why has it become so prevalent in the 2020s? In 1789, the citizens of France decided it was time to revolt against the aristocratic class that was making their lives miserable. Specifically, on July 14, 1789, a mob of French citizens who were very angry about the cost of bread first went into a military armory and seized all the cannons. Then they realized the cannons were useless without gunpowder. So, angry and frustrated, the mob went to the Bastille fortress to demand powder. They eventually overran the fortress, specifically a prison on the grounds, and that is recognized as the official beginning of the French Revolution. These working-class radicals called themselves the sans-culottes, literally meaning without underwear, to differentiate themselves from the nobles and bourgeois who wore silk undergarments. After the revolutionists stormed the Bastille, they realized that they had started a movement that most citizens supported. But they needed a way to rally them to their cause to take down the leadership and, well, fix the price of bread. The intellectuals in the city were quick to turn their resources toward the revolution. This was in the form of massive numbers of flyers, pamphlets, and newspapers that outlined their complaints and how they intended to fix the nation's problems. While this was great for the educated and higher class people who wanted to participate, this was not helping the majority since many were illiterate. They had to get creative. In came the sans-culottes to save the day. They were far less formal, as if their name didn't give that away, so the propaganda they created was generally less acceptable? Okay, I'll just say it. They were obsessed with scatology. Yes, you heard me right. They loved their poop jokes. So the revolution used an eclectic mix of formal mediums like flyers and newspapers put out by the intellectuals and crude jokes, songs, and caricatures created by the sans-culottes. The sans-culottes leaned heavily into using caricatures. It was said that a Parisian could find out who had been hanged and what decrees were made by looking at the caricatures displayed in the parks and galleries. They didn't stop there, though. They also created bawdy songs, dirty jokes, and more cartoons than anyone had seen before. The campaign was effective. The French Revolution was largely successful due to the clever propaganda they created, and a willingness to behead people. I think that's enough about the French for today, but you can see how they embraced the idea of propaganda and successfully used the concept to overthrow an overbearing and harmful government. After the success of the French Revolution, many adopted this approach, using it for widely varying purposes. Or, in more plain words, propaganda was used for good and evil extensively throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Now that you've heard the definitions and seen the origins, let's move on and look at the last half of the 20th century and where propaganda has gone in the 2020s to see how it has seeped into every nook and cranny of our civilization. The rise of propaganda, or how it's everything now. Propaganda took off during World War II when multiple powerful and ruthless forces vied for world control. They were all running well-funded and effective propaganda departments. For example, the Nazis were big fans of propaganda, and they used it ruthlessly to excuse their attacks and atrocities with big, colorful images and catchphrases. Around this time, and especially immediately following the Second World War, Russia, well, they were known as the USSR back then, learned the power of propaganda. They too leaned heavily into the format, going so far as to create entirely new design language, making new fonts, and generally doing anything they could to convince the population that communism was a good thing, which had to be exceedingly tricky. Now, those are both examples of regimes that leaned into the idea of tailored information dissemination, and both found initial success, or were at least initially successful at suppressing the citizens who disagreed with their policies. But you also probably know that both of these regimes fell, and fell hard, which I think shows that lying to people will only get you so far. It can't last forever. Now, communists and Nazis weren't the only ones using this manipulative art form to attempt to control their population or excuse their horrible actions. The United States and its allies in the war used the same propaganda techniques to sway their citizens to support their decisions, recruit soldiers, promote conservation, and a bunch of other things they said would help the war effort. The US propaganda, like what less reputable countries made, had many similarities. For example, all this art existed to convince citizens that they should support the government's actions. The big difference was the actions they were trying to justify. In Hitler's Germany, they talked about who they hated or who they would invade next. The propaganda leaned toward convincing people to be patriotic and support the war in the US and allied countries. Okay, I won't dissemble here. The differences are minor in the end. Propaganda is a tool used by the powerful to convince the populace to care about what they are doing. So, depending on your perspective, any of the world's persuasive art could be seen as equally good or bad. So I will not try to convince you that American propaganda was more or less harmful or helpful than the same garbage that Russia, Germany, or anyone else made. But this shows that the world's most powerful governments had seen the power of propaganda, and they were all willing to use it in any form to accomplish their goals. So the war had ended, and the world was returning to a state of peace. Well, relative peace. We did still have the Cold War. At that time, propaganda in America and the rest of the Western world had to change. War posters and cartoons had inundated people, and they were becoming wary of government-created media. So the powers that be had to find another way to reach people and make propaganda acceptable. After World War II, many new technologies were developed, like the telephone, the car, radio, films, and television. Those who needed to sway the public opinion on anything quickly realized that these new mediums were just as valuable, if not more helpful, in spreading their messages. So throughout the 1900s, America just watched the propaganda machine grow and spread until it had its slimy tentacles into every form of entertainment and communication we could dream up. How did they do this? Well, it was easy. They had to stop making propaganda look like propaganda. Instead of a flashy poster, they could plant a news story in the nation's papers. Instead of an obvious approach, they could send a press release to a radio or TV broadcast news to have it read. But why would they stop with just these few methods of dissemination? Why not make, or at least fund, television and movies that are propaganda for government interests? Look at Top Gun or any film that uses real US military vehicles. They had permission, approval, and money directly from the Department of Defense. And you'll note that the Americans always come out looking squeaky clean. I was in the military. It doesn't work like that. Capitalism, never to be outdone by anyone, of course, embraced propaganda concepts and approaches enthusiastically. So as soon as America started booming after the Second World War, entertainers, advisors, and anyone who could began using the same techniques. I mean, really. Ads, at least modern ones, are just corporate propaganda. There's no denying that. Now, as the 20th century was coming to a close, one of the greatest inventions in human history was growing fast and coming into most homes. I am, of course, talking about the internet. The internet was a major boom for governments and propaganda peddlers worldwide because they were no longer limited by anything other than their own creativity. As the online world expanded exponentially, so did the presence of propaganda. Since then, the form has gotten so sneaky there is little content these days that isn't some kind of propaganda. When we look at the media landscape today, it's clear that not much gets made if it doesn't have someone's interests at the heart of it. The propaganda you see all day, every day, may not necessarily be wrong, but being aware of it is critical to making good choices and understanding our own beliefs. All right, we now know how propaganda used to work and how it changed over time. We've seen how it has risen and become a powerful weapon for anyone who wants to wield it openly against anyone they please. So, before you go on to another video, let's look at how you can recognize and immunize yourself against this onslaught modern humans face. How to recognize propaganda. How do you recognize propaganda? Well, it's easy. Is it content that exists? It could be anything: music, movies, television, print media, books, whatever you want. If someone took the time to create something, they had a message to convey, and the media you enjoy is hoping to convince you of something. Again, I want to reiterate that just because something is propaganda, that does not mean it is necessarily bad. I have no doubt that a lot of the art and media in the world were created with good intentions, like teaching peace or exploring the human condition. But they all had a message to convey, and the creators are using their medium to convince you. Knowing that nothing is created without some intent is the first step. Try to watch everything while keeping both an open mind and a healthy sense of skepticism. And above all, know that nothing you find is without some persuasion built in. You can also easily see the correlation between modern advertising and the propaganda of the last century. Ads are designed to convince you that you need something that you probably don't. So here's an idea. Bookmark it the next time you see something that you need to get right now and wait at least a day. If you're still interested, research this product or service, see how others felt about their experiences, and generally learn what you can to see if this need is genuine or the direct result of clever marketing propaganda. This is not easy to do in today's world where everything is next day delivery, but if you try it for a week, you'll notice a lot less random, ultimately wasteful purchases. Ads are by no means the only place to find manipulative media. All the media there is has some goal to change your mind about something. In this case, and most of my videos, my goal is to get you thinking about the larger picture and other perspectives. But to do that, I have to capture your attention and get you to listen. That is why I called this video Propaganda About Propaganda. I don't want to lie to you. Honestly, I don't think the vast majority of artists in the world have anything but the best of intentions. But it would still bode well for everyone if we took everything with a grain of salt. On the other hand, there are plenty of ideas, concepts, and various forms of, quote, news out there that are blatantly manipulative. In the past few election cycles, we saw the Russians use misinformation, a different name for propaganda, to affect the presidential elections. The various politicians and political parties seem to think whoever screams the loudest wins, and to some extent they sadly appear to be correct. I would argue that there is so much noise these days that there is little room for substance. I think we can at least partially thank the 24-hour news for that. Regardless of where you fall on the political or philosophical spectrum, someone is trying to get you to back their plan, idea, product, or whatever every second of the day. We are bombarded, and that is partly the plan. The more junk you see, the more exhausted you get, and the less likely you are to think critically or to even care at all. That is a lot of relatively scary stuff we just talked about, but as I always try and do, and as I think we should all be doing, I want to look at the bright side of this mess and wrap this video up with the conclusion. Conclusion: it's not all bad. With the internet, anyone can say whatever they want. I mean, I have a YouTube channel, and in my humble opinion, that proves it. So before you fall into a pit of despair thinking there's nothing genuine in the world, you might want to look at it from a different perspective. Propaganda is a powerful tool, and we can all use it, hopefully for good. Do you need to convince your boss to approve a project, or do you want to persuade others to try something? Use clever propaganda to enforce your side while subtly and effectively tearing down the opposition. Use these tricks for good, and you might get positive results. Don't just use logic on your peers, use manipulation. They will, and so will your bosses and everyone else. The difference is whether you use it for good or for evil. I sincerely hope that all of you are the kind of people that will use this knowledge to help make the world better. Maybe some of you will start making propaganda to support LGBTQ causes. Perhaps another of you feels very strongly about transportation regulations, so start convincing everyone else that your ideas are good. I think it's time we stop letting the rich and powerful have all the good toys and tools. Now is the time for the entire world to wake up and add its voice to the cacophony that the world has become today. Maybe if you're lucky and your idea is really good, others will take up your cause, and before you know it, you've helped start an actual revolution. Although I hope they're the non-violent kind. What did you think about these concepts? Do you plan to learn more from the resources below? Did you hear something you'd like me to do a full video on? Let me know in the comments if your interest has been piqued by any of the subjects covered here at the Xennial Philosopher. Check out the references and links to related videos and articles in the description to learn more about this video's topics. If you still need to subscribe to the channel, remember so you will get all the new videos to expand your mind and grow your perception.